Yeah, Monday and Wednesday, class, the business class is taking over our traditional audit time. So just for Monday and Wednesday. Hey, were the presentations any good?
I'm only paying business anyway, so.
Might be kind of interesting to see. But anyway, critical elections occur every 25 to 35 years in American politics. So that's how, they occur in regular cycles. So not all elections are the same. Not only that, they tend to be marked by very high turnout, much higher turnout than people had expected for that given time. And whenever a new person gets in, remember how I talked about de-alignment, where people were leaving parties, traditional parties? This is an example of realignment. So in realignment, that means one side is switching to the other, or a new group comes into politics. And I'll give you a couple examples so you get an idea of critical elections in the past, but how they served as critical elections. First of all, now our first elections, it was like George Washington, and nobody really wanted to run against George Washington. I think, like John Adams offered himself as sort of a sacrificial lamb, so he got one electoral vote and he could be like vice president. So the first the first elections were not contested. But, and John Adams won his first election, 1796. But in 1800 is considered a critical election. You had Federalists versus Democratic Republicans. And back then, you didn't just have one representative per party. You could have multiple Federalists and multiple Democratic Republicans. So in other words, you had people like John Adams running for re-election as a Federalist, and Alexander Hamilton, who was a Federalist. You had Thomas Jefferson running as a Democrat-Republican, but also Aaron Burr running as Democrat-Republican, and Aaron Burr and Thomas Jefferson were from the same state, Virginia. So this could get kind of confusing. Federalists, Adams was from Massachusetts, and Hamilton was from New York. So you had this big four-way mess going on. Now, does anybody know what happens if nobody gets a majority in the Electoral College? Nobody may get a majority in the popular vote today. That doesn't matter. What happens when you don't get a majority in the Electoral College? Does anybody know what happens? When no one gets the minimum. What's the minimum to win, by the way? Does anybody know? 270, yeah. 270 to win. There's a website. That's the one I built all my models that didn't work out. Anybody watch Colin Cowherd or listen to him on the radio? ESPN sports analyst, now he's with Fox Sports. Anybody watch him? He always has this bit about after football, like Monday morning or Tuesday morning, it always goes, where Colin was right and where Colin was wrong. Hey, who admits they're wrong? But anyway, yeah, you need 270. Back then, the number of electoral college votes were pretty small. How do we know 270? The what? Anybody know what 270 is? It would be a majority, because how many electoral college votes are there? Does anybody know? I'll give you a hint. It's the same number as number of House of Representatives or Senate.
135.
What?
House of Representatives, you said?
House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate combined. How many are there?
538.
538, yeah. So many people, like when we were watching TV last night, half the people were watching TV and half were on their cell phones looking at 538 and Nate Silver. Where's 538 come from? Total number of House Representatives and Senators combined. Make sense? So 270 would be half of those. Back then, the number of senators and representatives was a smaller number. But there you have it. I hit the power, but I hope that eventually it'll come back. But nobody got a majority. It was something like, you had somebody got 80, somebody got 79, somebody got 82, somebody got 74. They were all bunched up together. And back then, you didn't run with vice presidents. Anybody know? How did they pick the vice presidents early on? Does anybody know this one?
Whoever came second.
Whoever came in second place. Which meant that, Thomas Jefferson was vice president because he lost to John Adams. He finished second. So they thought this was a good idea, right? It'll be something for the loser. So both will be in government. It was a neat idea. I don't fault our founding fathers. But after this crazy election, they decided on some rules. And so now, anybody know how they pick the vice president? Unless you. So, how do you pick the vice president? Who is the vice president today? Anybody know? Joe Biden. Oh, very good. Who's going to be vice president? January 20-something or other. Mike Pence. Okay. Who picked Mike Pence? Donald Trump. Yeah. So now presidential candidates pick their own vice presidents rather than have the loser get in. Why do you think they would do that? Why do you think they made that change? Yeah. Many people thought, Jefferson didn't like being vice president, and so a lot of people feel that Jefferson did what he could to undermine John Adams. Excellent answer, Wesley. Very good. And so that's why they made these changes. So what happens when you don't get a majority? Who gets to pick? Does anybody know? Which one? It goes to the House of Representatives. All the House of Representatives votes on who should be the winner. This was interesting because the House of Representatives was controlled by the Federalist Party, yet even though it was all bunched together, the top two were Democrat Republicans. Can you imagine the Federalists? Like, okay, we get to pick the winner. That's the good news. The bad news is you have to choose between two Democrat Republicans. It was very, very, very close. But nevertheless, anybody know who they picked? Yeah, they picked Jefferson. Anybody know why? The what? Well, actually, a guy named Alexander Hamilton, he finished fourth. He had 74 votes. He was still really close. But he went to all the Federalists and said, you know, Jefferson's not a great guy. He's kind of a scheming person. But Aaron Burr would be like a dictator. He would be horrible. He's morally corrupt. He would, he would create a monarchy if he could. Don't pick Aaron Burr. So the House of Representatives voted for Thomas Jefferson. It's the only time in our history it's gone, well, no, twice in our history it's gone to the House of Representatives. Well, you know what happened afterwards, right? If I said names like Aaron Burr and Alexander Hamilton, what happened? Anybody heard about the two of these characters? What occurred? Anything famous? They had a duel. Most people trace it to Alexander Hamilton speaking poorly of Aaron Burr, who at the time was vice president. So in a duel, now Alexander Hamilton wasn't like somebody who didn't know what he was doing. He was a general under Washington. Who here's been to Fort Benning, the National Infantry Museum? Y'all been to that? You know that first scene where they talk about the last 100 yards? It's like just as you walk on in, well, not immediately, there's like but when you walk into the museum part, y'all been to that part? That part, and starts with something at the Battle of Yorktown, and you walk through and you see all these colonials assaulting a hill. Alexander Hamilton led that charge. He was like 32 years old. So he knew what he was doing. But back then, see, he figured, okay, most duels, you didn't shoot the other person. You showed up just to kind of prove your manhood. You got up on the field and you just fired into the air, or fired into the ground, and that settled it. So Alexander Hamilton fires in the air and Aaron Burr plugs him. I know what you're thinking. I bet you Alexander Hamilton probably wished he had, waited a few seconds to see what Burr was going to do. He might have won the duel. Now luckily, it turns out that actually Aaron Burr Alexander Hamilton was about him. He was a pretty shady person. He actually tried to create his own country west of the United States. If he'd stayed around long enough, he would have been indicted for treason, many people think. Hamilton was right. That's why Hamilton gets a musical and Burr does not. Well, maybe that's not the only reason. Alexander Hamilton was a very interesting person. But with that Democrat-Republican victory, Democrat Republicans run the table. Here's what I'd like you to do. Can you find a website right now that looks at a history of presidential elections? Like who wins, what years they're in, what party they're from? You can probably find it on 270towin.com. Hell, I'll even take Wikipedia. But take a look for yourselves. After the election of 1800, what do you see? I should know this. I knew I should say it like that. What do y'all have? So find a grid where it'll show you who won the 1800 election, the 1804 election, the 1808 election. You don't have to memorize them for the exam, but we're going to look for trends. What do you see? First off, who's got a really good sight so the rest of us can follow it? Ooh, that one looks pretty good. Anybody got a grid sheet that says who won or who lost? Which ones do y'all have? Hey, y'all these little maps. Do you have any that say anything about the winners and losers?
You click on 27.
Oh, okay, 26. Okay, so they got maps. Do they have any that have like a list of them, top to bottom? Which one? Info Please? Info Please might have that. I've seen one on that. Okay. Oh, it's got a whole list of them. Yeah, there you go. Lists all the winners. Yep. Oh, I was wrong. Sorry. It was 73 to 73. Byrd and Jefferson. Adams got 65. Yes. Info Please, history of presidential elections. So, who wins in 1808, or excuse me, 1804? So we know Jefferson, a Democrat Republican, wins in 1800. Who wins in 1804? Sing it out. Jefferson. Okay, who wins in 1808? Madison. What party is he from? Yeah, because we have that two-term limit. He's Democrat Republican, even though he authored Federalist Papers. That confuses some people. Who wins in 1812? Who wins in 1816? What party? Democrat Republican, right? Now do you see a trend, right? With that one narrow victory, Jefferson and the Democrat Republicans set the trend. By 1820, who wins? Tell me about the 1820 election. Who won that? Yeah, who'd he beat? No, in 1820. Oh, he was on as a technicality. Like, actually, technically, Monroe won the 1820 election. There was like no opponent. Quincy Adams didn't even run. I mean, somebody just stuck his name in there just for show. Yeah, Monroe won the first ever unopposed election. Why? The Federalist Party disappeared. Keep in mind, they were the first winners to win. They had the Adams presidency and they controlled Congress early on. The Democrat Republicans ran the table and the Federalists ceased to exist. 1824, a close contentious election. Who wins that one? You actually said it, Nate. Go ahead. Yeah, John Quincy Adams wins that. That's the second and last time it went to the House. Nobody got a majority. But who wins in 1828, the next critical election? I'm sorry? Andrew Jackson. Look from 1828 to 1856. How many elections do we have? Let's see, 1828, 1832, 36, 40, 44, 48, 52, 56. 8 elections. How many do the Democrats win? Not all of them. 1828 to 1856. 8 elections. How many did the Democrats win? 6. John says 6. You said 5.
6.
All right. Yeah, in 6 of them, the Democrat Party wins. See, Jackson's success in knocking off President John Quincy Adams allows Democrats to run the table. Anybody know where was Jackson from? Okay, I know, he was born in South Carolina, but where's he from? Most of his life. The guy in $20 bill, ever heard of where he's from? Nobody knows? His house is still around. You can go visit it if you go to the capital of, anybody know? Nobody knows where Jackson's from? Old Hickory, war hero, led a group of volunteers. There should be. Come on, who are the balls? Tennessee. As a western state, Democrat Republicans brought in Westerners, the new actor, into the Democratic fold. So, and that's, the West is where things are growing. Back then, the West was like Kentucky, Tennessee. So from 1828 on, they win 75% of all the elections. The Whigs, their opponents, win 2 elections. William Henry Harrison and Zachary Taylor, who my son's named for. Neither of them last more than a year or two. And their vice presidents are not even Whigs. One was a disaffected Democrat, the other was a know-nothing. Isn't that a great name for a party? The know-nothing is an anti-immigrant party. Who gets elected in 1860? Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln wins. Anybody know, can they tell you what percentage of the vote he won? The popular vote? Anybody know this? Did he win 50% of the popular vote? 45? 40%? 39. He's one of the only presidents who's ever won with less than 40% of the vote. But it was still more than anyone else. Democrats were split north and south. They had the old Whigs created this constitutional union party. It was a lot of chaos. You had 4 candidates again. Remember, there's a lot of chaos in a strong third party. That's another thing you see sometimes in critical elections. Abraham Lincoln wins the 1860 election. The party was only formed in 1854. In Wisconsin, by the way. I've been to the headquarters. Ripon, Wisconsin. Which was kind of the key state last night, wasn't it? Look from 1860 to 1884. How many times did the Republicans win? You could look on some of us if you're like me and the computer's not pulling. So what do you do? 1860 to 1884. Who wins? Actually, you can go all the way up to 1892. Who's winning? What do y'all have? Yeah. How many times do Democrats win? Yeah, it's the same guy, Grover Cleveland. So, Republicans run the table. Y'all know about that running the table? Anybody here shoot pool? Nobody shoots pool? You shoot pool? Good. Are we going to play against each other?
Yeah, you know.
Over at the, oh wait. Yeah, you know when you're running the table, you're knocking all the balls in, one after the other, right? If you're playing solids and stripes, you're knocking them all in, getting the 8 ball, right? If you're going 9 ball, you're going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You're like this guy named Fast Eddie, played by Paul Newman in the movies, and he's not even looking, he's like shooting or shooting behind his back, and he's just hitting everything in. Or Tom Cruise in the Color Line. Cool. I noticed that you turn on ESPN late enough after all those football games, they start getting in a shooting pool. Yeah. Think about this. The Democrats ran the table from 1828 to 1856. From 1860 to 1892, Republicans run the table. Did y'all know that? Elections are not random in America. They are trend elections. Now, there was some back and forth in the 1880s, 1890s. Both parties were pretty close to each other. But from 1896 to to 1928. Who's the dominant party? This is kind of cool. You guys are doing political science work. What you're doing is you're analyzing. You're analyzing this critical election theory to see if it works. It's very hotly debated in American politics whether it exists or not. So what you're doing is, rather than just assume your professor says it, you're checking out evidence for yourself. What do you notice? 1896 to 1928. Who's the dominant party? Yeah. They win 1896, 1900, 1904, 1908, 1920, 1924, 1928. So 7 times. Only one guy wins who's not a Republican. Anybody know who that is? Woodrow Wilson, political science professor. Yeah, we all like him. President of Princeton. Oh yeah, and governor of New Jersey. But I like that president. I like that political science professor president. I like that. And I know what you're thinking. Really? How many have there been? Not many. Wilson. The only reason Wilson won, do you remember that exercise we did about where Taft and Roosevelt battled each other? Y'all remember that? Should I cancel? Woohoo! We got pictures! Joe was right. He said eventually it would come. So excited to talk with you. Joe was a pretty shocking one. No way, I think I'm slow. Yeah, Woodrow Wilson only won because 2 Republicans ran against each other. One got 4 million, that was Roosevelt. Taft got 3 million. Wilson got 6 million. Republicans would have won by 1 million votes. But because they split, remember that debate about constrained and expanded view of the presidency? Because those 2 Republicans couldn't agree and they fought each other, the Democrats lucked into a win. And did Wilson win by a wide margin? Take a look at what the Electoral College says. Did Wilson win big? Did Wilson win big? Can y'all find that? 1916. Did Wilson win by a wide margin? No, he barely won. It was kind of like last night, everyone stayed up to see what Wisconsin was going to do. This state was California. And I know what you're thinking, oh, California's big. Well, no, it wasn't that big, but it was big enough. It had like maybe 12, 15, 16 electoral votes. And it was a back and forth. The Republicans didn't work, they couldn't agree on something. They had some progressives didn't like the stalwarts or whatever. And so what happened was California narrowly went to Wilson. Wilson went to bed that night with his advisor telling him, sorry, you lost. When he woke up, he was still president. Well, I mean, and he was going to be president for another 4 years. So it was that close. So y'all see these? Nice cute maps. So for 7 out of 9 elections, Republicans dominate, after a little bit of fighting back and forth between Cleveland and Harrison. See, critical elections, American elections, it's not like, oh, the parties switch sides every 4 years to maybe 8 years. They're big, long trend elections. And oftentimes somebody switches sides. The Northeast became dominated by Republicans. This goes till 1932. 1932, the Great Depression has hit. It started with the stock market collapse in 1929. It gets really bad by 1932. I mean, the country is falling apart in 1932. And there was one group that always voted Republican. They were the most loyal Republican group. African Americans. Right now, Jordan's going, what? How is that possible? Or are you not thinking that, Jordan? Yeah. Why? Why did African Americans vote Republican? We're talking like 95% Republican.
Because Republicans at the time were the party of emancipation.
Yeah, the party of Lincoln. Not only that, you had guys like Teddy Roosevelt. You know what Teddy Roosevelt did that was so controversial? True story. Teddy Roosevelt invited an African American to the White House for lunch. Like as a lunch guest. That was a controversy issue in 1904. Can you believe that? 1904. And I mean, Democrats just attacked the president. How dare you let someone who's African American into the White House? This is back when it was like White House. Okay, back. That's how people saw things. Roosevelt was different. This is going to be important because you'll now understand this. See, two things happen. One, why do you think African Americans switched from Republicans to Democrats? Because back in 1904, Democrats weren't even letting them into the White House. What changed?
Civil rights movement.
This is before the Civil Rights Movement. Even before the Civil Rights Movement. What else? The answers are actually right up there on the board. Why do you think African Americans switched parties to go with the Democrats? This was unheard of in the 20s. In the 20s, you actually had some Democrats who were members of the Klan. What changed? Anybody know? Can you all see the answers? Well, why did African Americans desert the Republican Party in 1932? Go ahead, take your shots. The answers are all on the board.
That's a good question.
Yeah, what would that? How would that have anything to do with it?
Economy?
Yeah, the economy was cratering. African Americans felt the pinch just as bad as everyone else, maybe worse. Who's the winner of the 1932 election? Yeah, oh, what was that last name again? Go ahead. Roosevelt. Did I not mention that name a minute or two ago? Teddy Roosevelt. See, because Teddy Roosevelt, see here you had a Democrat was nominated, whose cousin, or uncle, whatever, family relative, is the one who brought African Americans into the White House. So they realized that this Democrat was okay. Does that make sense to you? Not only that, FDR actually campaigned. There were many pictures. He didn't even mind being pictures. It wasn't even a scandal. You can see pictures of him shaking hands of African Americans when he's driving by in his car. Someone else is driving. He's in the back. And he's like shaking hands with African Americans. Like that was unthinkable for a Democrat 8 years earlier. But he actually sought the African American vote. Republicans had been taking it for granted. Now, you mentioned civil rights, Brendan. You're not exactly wrong. Roosevelt brought African Americans into the party. Civil rights kept them in the Democratic Party ever since. And if you look at the elections from 1932 to 1964, what do you notice? Who wins? How many elections? 32, 36, 40, 44, 48, 52, 56, 60, 64. 9 elections. Who wins?
Democrats.
How many?
7.
7 out of 9. The only one who won was, anybody know which Republican?
Dwight Eisenhower.
Yeah, Dwight D. Eisenhower, who wasn't even really a Republican. He didn't even register until the year he ran for office. Democrats and Republicans sought to get him. He was about the most moderate person out there. Both parties liked him. But he was not a traditional Republican. In fact, traditional Republicans ran against Eisenhower, and they said, don't vote for him, he's not a real Republican. Kind of like some Republicans saying that to Trump this year. Do you see? These are wave elections, go back and forth. 1968, after the Civil Rights Movement, the Voting Rights Act. But it was a chaotic election. You had the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. You had the assassination of Bobby Kennedy, the frontrunner, the guy who won the Democratic nomination. There was a lot of chaos. Democrats like LBJ had gotten us into the Vietnam War, and their base of college students were mad about it. You had riots all over the place. You had riots about the situation in cities. Did you know this? I bet you didn't know this. In several riots that occurred, it usually started with an African American either being beaten or killed who had not committed any crimes or had not done a crime that deserved the death penalty or otherwise. Does that sound familiar? It's like history repeating itself. The country would seem like it was coming unglued. And so Republican, and not only that, but conservative Democrats supported Wallace. So Richard Nixon jumped in, a guy who had already lost an election before him. But he came in and pretty much said, I can solve the problems. And he did something. He appealed to Southern whites. It's actually called the Southern strategy or the Nixon strategy. Not the primary rule, but. I mean, back then, who did Democrats support? Democratic Party, but why? Why did Southern whites support the Democratic Party? Anybody know?
How to change.
No, why did the Southern whites support the Democratic Party? They had supported the Democratic Party since the 1860s. Why? Well, African Americans used to call the Republicans the party of Lincoln. So did Southern whites. Do you understand why now? Why did Southern whites support Democrats for over 100 years?
Oh, didn't like Lincoln.
No. Why did they not like Lincoln? What's so bad about Lincoln?
He put like no civil war. He made the emancipation and whatnot.
He was a Republican. The South was invaded, and the South was defeated. Even though Lincoln called for malice toward none and charity toward all, a lot of people had some hard feelings. If I ever want to get a lot of clickbait, if I want to get a lot of people to get a lot of angry columns and stuff, or angry letters to the editor, I just write something nice about Lincoln around here. Oh, do I get here?
So essentially, Southern people didn't figure out until the 80s that the parties had swapped.
Yeah. And in fact, like, you know, every year, whoever won the Democratic nomination in the South, they automatically won. No Republican ever got elected in the South. We're talking for 100 years. When Sonny Perdue, anybody heard of him? When he was Republican governor, he won in 2002. It was the first time since 1868 that there was a Republican governor of Georgia. All across the South, from the 70s, 80s, and 90s, Republicans actually started winning in the South. They switched sides. Anybody heard of a phrase called yellow dog? Like the yellow dog something or other? They'll call them yellow dog Democrats. Anybody heard of that? Does anybody have a yellow dog? And some of you have a yellow shirt. Do y'all have a yellow dog? Nobody has a yellow dog? Nobody has a golden retriever? A yellow lab? Nobody? What kind of dogs are they? Are they pretty independent-minded, hang out on their own? Kind of like cats, they don't need you?
Oh, no, mine
No. No. John, you got a yellow dog?
Okay.
Do you have a yellow dog? No, you don't. Okay. Yeah. They call them yellow dogs because yellow dogs are fiercely loyal. They'll never leave your side. Does that sound about right, Caitlin?
Yes.
They're always by your side. They're always on. So they called these folks, these Southern whites, yellow dog Democrats because they stayed loyal with the Democratic Party long after everything else changed. But something about the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act and the riots didn't sit well with Southern whites. Republicans, they were losing all their elections. They needed a change. So Republicans did something unusual during Nixon's time. He actually campaigned in the South and sought Southern votes. And it worked. Look from 1968 to 1988, the first election I voted in. 68, 72, 76, 80, 84, 88, 6 elections. How many do the Republicans win? 5. 5 out of 6. What's that percentage? Anybody know? 5 out of 6. What percent is that? Anybody know? Yeah, 80 something. That's what I was thinking. 80-some-odd percent, 82%. Yeah, that's not only that. When the Republicans won, they won in blowouts. Carter is the only exception, and he barely won. Gerald Ford actually won more states. It was kind of like the Super Bowl every year during this time in the 80s. I mean, all the elections were blowouts, and all the Super Bowls were blowouts. Seriously, they would call the election at like 7:30 p.m. They'd say, "Okay, Reagan is the next president," or by 8:30, Bush is the next president, or Nixon is. You know, in 2 elections, Democrats won only 1 state. It's a Republican title. But this changed in 1992 with the election of Bill Clinton. And Bill Clinton did something. Bill Clinton did something no Democrat had done in a long time. Campaigned in the Northeast, in New England. Now I know what you're thinking. New England, that's your whole lives. New England has been Democrat territory. But it did not used to be so. Look all throughout FDR's elections. The only states that ever voted against FDR were New England states. Even though Roosevelt was from freaking New York, close by. Anybody know why the Northeast for years, even the 60s, 70s, and 80s, voted Republican? Even when a Massachusetts governor like Michael Dukakis was on the ticket. Why? Why would New Englanders go for Republicans no matter what? For years and years, decades, centuries. Any guesses? Believe it or not, it all comes back to the Civil War again. Everything is about the Civil War. Why African Americans support a group. Why Southern whites support a group. Why would New Englanders support Republicans? What do we know about New England during the Civil War times? Does anybody know this? Any history people? Don't y'all ever study the Civil War, or are they just like, shh? Well, what were New Englanders like? How did they feel about the Civil War? Well, to borrow a Southern phrase, they were again it. That's where all the abolitionists were from. The ones who were the most in favor of the North, stopping slavery. This is where your Underground Railroad comes in. You know, and for most New Englanders, a Southerner was a traitor and a secessionist. I remember seeing a campaign where a New Englander said, "Not all Democrats are secessionists, but all secessionists were Democrats." Anybody ever read a book called Soup? It's about a kid. It was a series of books. It's about a kid. It's like growing up in the 90s. It's a coming of age story. Did y'all ever read that in school? We had to read this. It was about Soup. Soup is actually, the kid's, his name is like Leroy Roberts or something. But everyone called him Soup because his mom would yell out, "Soup's on!" and then he'd come running. And so they just called him Soup. Kind of like how strange nicknames come about, right? So it's about Soup. Well, anyway, it's set in New England in the 1930s. And I kid you not, you know what Soup does? Soup made a really big mistake. The teacher says, "What's going to happen in the 1936 election?" And Soup goes, "The Republican is going to kick the tar out of that Democrat." And he got his mouth washed out with soap. You ever watch A Christmas Story? The kid has to eat soap. Teacher washed his mouth out with soap. Do you know why? Not because she, you know, of course they were all Republicans, but he actually said the D word. He should have just said the Republican's going to win, but he actually said the Republican's going to destroy that Democrat. So he got his mouth washed out with soap because he said the D word. That's how it was for many years. Because a Democrat was a traitor, and many Northerners died in the Civil War, more than Southerners, 350,000 to 230,000. That's how people in New England view Democrats, until Bill Clinton. And we all know he's from the New England area, right? Anybody know where Bill Clinton was from? Arkansas. Wait a minute, that's not in New England. But see, he actually campaigned in the Northeast. And the guy was, well, let's put it this way. Many African Americans jokingly referred to him as the first black president. He was about as liberal on civil rights as a candidate could be in 1992. And so New England, whites in New England, years of hating Southerners, saw this Southerner who spoke the way they felt and said, we're open to the Democrat Party. If you look at your electoral maps, are you looking at election maps between the 90s? Go ahead and scroll up some. Scroll the maps from the 1990s. Oh, there you go. Okay, you were there already. Beforehand, more than 75% of all New England states went to Republicans before 1992. Take a look at that map really closely now. What do you see? From 1992 to 2012. What's New England? What color is New England? From 1992, the whole Northeast goes red in only one state in all those years. New Hampshire. Bush took it by like 1% in 2000. All the other states, all the other times, go blue, go Democrat. See what I mean by running the table? Now, in the last few minutes, 2016, could it be a critical election? You tell me. First off, does it meet the test of being 25, 35 years after the last critical election? Because if you've been keeping score, it's like every 25, 30 years we get one of these critical elections. How many years has it been since 1992? Since 1992. How many years? 16, 8. What, how many years? 24. It's 24, so it's pretty close, between 20 and 25 years. How's the turnout? Does anybody have a model where we can look up the turnout? What percentage of Americans voted last time? What? Yeah, last night. What percentage of Americans turned out? I remember when I was a college student, 50% turned out. What's the turnout? Was it 50%? 55%? 46%? Wow, that would be low. Who's got the numbers? What's the turnout? Okay, somebody look at turnout. Somebody look at the results last night. Remember I said that sometimes a third party jumped in. There were multiple candidates in 1800. There were many candidates in 1860. There were actually 4 candidates in 1800 and 1860. 1896. I mean, you know, you have some third parties. Definitely in 1992, yeah, this guy named Ross Perot, a Texas businessman, won 19%. George Wallace won 13% in several southern states in 1968. Did any third parties run last night? Who's got the numbers? Did any third parties run last night?
Yes.
How'd they do? They what?
Gary Johnson got 3% in most states.
The all-time record for a libertarian was 1.1%. That's the most the libertarians ever got. How many did he get?
Yeah, but you know what average probably is 3% per state.
Wow. 3% may not sound like very much, but that is huge for the Libertarian Party. Or as they like to say nowadays, huge. He didn't win any states. So what's the turnout? Anybody got it? Any guesses? I'm sure it's just an estimate right now. Don't make the professor try and search something. I'm old and you're young, so you should be able to do it faster than me. Exit poll results in record voter turnout predicted. Voter turnout up 5%. That doesn't sound like much. That's a lot, especially given that 2008 and 2012 were actually pretty good. When I was a college student in 1988 and 1996, turnout was barely about 50%. So much higher. You've got all the ingredients for a critical election. Did any group switch sides last night? Y'all watched. Did anybody see anything different that happened that we hadn't seen in years?
She got 52% of the moderate vote. So she still won the majority of the moderate vote and still lost.
Wow, 52% of the moderate.
Wow.
They're probably more conservatives than liberals, I believe. That's probably what I gave him to win.
No,
Although it's still pretty close.
81%. She got 84.
Oh, of that, but I mean the total number of votes
okay.
are smaller than conservatives. So turnout is up. Did any group switch sides last night? Any states that, let's say, had not gone Republican in a long time, go for the Republicans?
Wisconsin.
Yeah. Wisconsin, Pennsylvania.
All right.
Yeah. The last time Wisconsin went for the Republicans was 1984, when I was 14 years old. The last time Pennsylvania went for the Republicans was when I was a college freshman. If you look at me, I am old. Could this be a critical election? It's one of two things. It's a critical election, which would mean for the next 25 to 35 years, this will be the new majority. Until you're in your 50s, folks. Until you're old like me. Or this could be like one of those elections where it's there's a blip on the horizon. It's Grover Cleveland or John Quincy Adams interrupting, making an election. Donald Trump blows it, and then Democrats go run the table again for another 25, 35 years like they did in 1896. Or this is a new majority for the next 3 decades. It'll be a Trump-type majority. The next 4 years, we'll figure it out. Any thoughts? I have one last question for you. This is just a show of hands. I won't write anything down. If we were to have a CE that just only focused on the election that would be discussion-based, how many of you would go for something like that? lunchtimes, or not lunchtime, but like 11:15 to 12 CE, kind of like we did about the 2016 election, or we did about terrorism. Would anybody be up for that? Like a CE event where we talk about the results of the 2016 election, what we do now, where we're going now. Too soon? How about next week? Too soon. Email me, let me know. So you have a class of 140 or 150 to 250? Can we meet after that? Second, can you stop by at 250 or you gotta take off?
I have to see out. Yeah, I can stop by soon.
Okay. I've got a class from 12:30 to 12:40 to 1:40. How you doing here?
$2 to come out and check my car.
12:40 to 1:40.
What am I stopping by for?
Oh, just figure out what time we'll take off.
I am good,
And I'll get you signed.
anytime. I have a class until 11:10, but I would be able to miss that if we needed to leave before then.
Okay. I'll send
Doesn't
out.
matter.
I'll send out letters. To
Okay, and I sent you.
Yeah, you sent me my schedule. Hey, Grant, how's it going?
Anything